Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to the Aspect of the Week video series. In this video, I pick one aspect that stands out to me as being significant each week and tell you a little bit about what the aspect is and how it might manifest or what to expect as it peaks. So I'm looking at an aspect for the last few days of June, first few days of July. So this pretty transitional week as we shift out of the end of the first half of the year, which is end of June, and into the second half of the year. So kind of starting the second half or back end of the year. And of course, this aspect is Mars in Leo opposite Saturn in Aquarius. This is a dramatic aspect that is technically considered a difficult or problematic aspect. It's happening from 12 degrees Leo to 12 degrees Aquarius on Thursday, July 1st in all major time zones. So we need to talk a little bit about this aspect. If you are experiencing this aspect directly transiting your chart, definitely let me know in the comments how it's showing up for you. There's a few ways to think about it from a technical or a cycles perspective, even before we get into the Mars-Saturn vibe together, is to remind ourselves that Saturn is bouncing around through 12 degrees of Aquarius off and on throughout 2021. So at 3 different points this year, Saturn is moving forward through 12 Aquarius, then retrograde through 12 Aquarius as it is now, and then forward again through 12 Aquarius later this year. So from a personal perspective, if you have planets at 12 degrees of Aquarius or any of the other fixed signs, which includes Taurus, Leo, or Scorpio, you're in the middle of a fairly substantial Saturn transit to that natal planet or to the angles or points that you might have there. So the Mars opposing Saturn as a transiting thing is going to activate that longer running trend in your personal chart if you do have planets at 12 degrees of any of the fixed signs. Now, many of us don't. I know I don't. But if we're thinking about this from the perspective of the astrological weather, we're all influenced by Mars opposite Saturn in the same way that you're influenced by a sunny day or a snowstorm, depending on where you are. So Mars opposite Saturn, I always interpret or feel this aspect, if you like, as an aspect of frustration or thwarted will. The idea is that Mars and Saturn operate in very different ways and want really different things. Mars triggers confidence and inspires action, whereas Saturn demands very careful planning before any of that action is taken. Mars and Saturn also work on different timelines. So the priorities of Mars are more immediate and short term, whereas the priorities of Saturn are more substantial and have longer timelines. So one way you might experience this clash between Mars and Saturn early July is that it might describe you feeling caught between immediate things that require your attention in the moment versus long-term plans or projects that you can't ignore or let go of because you're trying to build a foundation for the future. So from Saturn's perspective, Mars shows up as this kind of perhaps disruptive or irritating type of influence that is impeding your ability to stay focused on the long term. From Mars's perspective, Saturn is preventing you enjoying something or doing something today because it's that constant voice of wisdom or reason, or perhaps the voice of fear inside you, which is saying, are you sure you want to do that? What's going to happen next week or next year if you do this thing today? Technically speaking, with Mars in Leo and Saturn in Aquarius, and also just based on the Chaldean order of the planets, Saturn is going to have the dominating influence in this aspect. And what I mean by that is that at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we honor Saturn and contain Mars. That's how I'm thinking about this aspect, at least. And what does honoring Saturn mean? It means that even when you are temporarily or momentarily distracted and have to attend to something immediate that's kind of a fire that's flared up, we can't ignore or completely neglect the longer term priorities that demand a portion of our resources, including our most precious resources, our time and energy. So Saturn in Aquarius is trying to help you create a more substantial restructure, change, consolidation, or refocus in your life. You have a lot of time to put this Saturn in Aquarius plan or project into place. Saturn will be in Aquarius until March of 2023. And so this is one of those kind of temporary bumps in the road that is certainly got the potential to frustrate you, to have you expend a lot of energy for very little reward. Or maybe you find yourself in an opposition type experience where you are at odds with another person or another organization that is having an impact on your situation, that is creating that quality of delay or even bureaucracy and paperwork that you need to navigate or negotiate. For some of you listening, this Mars opposite Saturn is going to describe a difficult couple of days where you are dealing with an experience or an event that is heavy, that is weighing on you, or that has brought you down to a certain degree. But for other people, in my experience working with clients in nearly 20 years of practice, I also know that an aspect like this can describe a time of greater effort towards a longer-term goal or vision. And that's not always a bad thing. I know technically, astrologically, this ticks all the boxes for a difficult aspect. But sometimes in our lives, we have periods where we are under the pump or we're at crunch time, where deadlines are converging and we feel like we've got a lot to do in a short space of time. But we also have our eye on this prize or this big vision or project that we're working towards. And even though the amount of effort that might need to be expended is unsustainable on an ongoing basis, an aspect like this is often a clue that greater effort is needed in the short term, especially to keep the momentum up or the progress up for that longer goal that you have in mind. So even though I know this is technically a very difficult aspect and some people are going to have maybe a challenging experience with it, I also know that others of you are going to be like, well, I'm just at this really hectic time in my life where I have to do these things now and they're all important and I'm just going to knuckle down and do it. And rather than Mars Saturn indicating that you shouldn't do it, Mars Saturn is acting in that descriptive rather than prescriptive transit way, which is describing the nature of our efforts right now. So a way that you can check in with yourself is to make sure that some of your effort or your energy or your attention is going towards a goal or a project that is going to last 12 months or have an impact over the next few years for you, rather than just the immediate or the short term. So I always like to think about, I'm just going to read a couple of sentences here. To move forward now, you need a plan and you need a slow or a measured timeline. Mars and Saturn operate in totally different ways. And when they clash, it can highlight some of the problems in the plan that you're working with. While those problems can be difficult in the short term, they usually turn out to be things that you're happy to have dealt with, addressed, or managed in the long term. So sometimes what we define as a problem really depends on our timeline. Is it a problem just because it's annoying you today? But in 5 years' time, will you look back and go, I'm so glad that showed up because now we've addressed it and it's now part of a solid foundation rather than something we have to keep coming back to. So this aspect can help you push forward with goals relating to the longer Saturn in Aquarius cycle. It's a little bit like a stress test. Mars opposing Saturn in Aquarius is sort of indicating, how are you going with the Saturn in Aquarius stuff? Have you already done some consolidation in the last 6 months? Have you restructured so that your obligations or duties are more manageable, realistic, and sustainable? If you have, you're more likely to find that you can manage whatever issue pops up under Mars Saturn this week with a level of ease. If you haven't, if you have been continuing to take on tasks or duties that you feel guilty about or responsible for, or you don't want to burden others with, so that you're actually feeling almost like an old, person like 90 years old bowed down. If you're feeling like that before this transit comes in, then something is going to have to give because you have no more capacity to handle extra. So these are some of the things to think about. In Saturn transits, Saturn can be a little bit unrelenting. He can kind of keep pushing and keep bringing more your way. As you develop the backbone, which is sort of the proverbial or symbolic Saturn within you, the firmness to say, that's a great thing, but I can't take that on right now, or I'm not available for that at this point in time. As you do that, you're able to keep that quality control piece in play, which is something that Saturn is really concerned with. So the idea here is to kind of manage some of your fears, because that's another Saturn thing, so that you don't end up making a short-term decision or an impulsive decision that could have difficult long-term consequences. There are limits about right now, and I think being respectful of some of those limits, even if you don't like them, is helpful and appropriate. There are things about our situation with our move that I wish I could change. I wish we could get a direct flight, but I don't have control over, the airline schedules, for instance. And based on the way those things have changed in the last few years, something that would normally be available is not. And I could spend a lot of time and energy pushing against that, but it's more useful for me to hold on to that energy, manage the situation, and move on to the next thing. So that's what I mean by there may be some restriction or rule, some sort of external thing that you're like, this isn't ideal, but it's not a deal breaker at the end of the day. So it's managing a lot of these Saturnian things, boundaries, responsibilities, priorities, limits. Are you dealing with those things that are being put on you from outside forces? Are you able to set some limits yourself? Control what you can so that when those external things are put upon you, you have a better capacity to handle that. Now, looking at the chart for the day this aspect happens, I want to bring it up on the screen right now. So this aspect peaks on July 1st. So let's just come back here. What I noticed, so here's 12 degrees Aquarius and 12 degrees Leo. Now, keep in mind that this energy of Mars opposing Saturn, it's actually going to last almost 2 months. And we're already through the first month of this. As soon as Mars went into Leo in early June, the energy of this kind of opposition, pushing, polarity, weightiness has been building. And even though this aspect peaks on July 1st, until Mars leaves Leo, which is not till the end of the month, there is a quality of this aspect. It's starting to dissipate, but it hasn't gone completely as Mars separates from Saturn. So there's a lot of June and July 2021 that is this idea of seesawing back and forward between the short term and the immediate, the long term and the lasting, the need for instant gratification versus the ability to self-regulate and focus on long-term goals or sustainable practices. As I mentioned, technically speaking, Saturn has the upper hand here, partly because Saturn's in one of its home signs and Mars isn't, but also just the nature of Saturn being the most superior of the visible planets. He does tend to have an overriding influence, so that any other planet in aspect to Saturn or any other of the visible planets in aspect to Saturn tends to take on a lot of what Saturn's offering. So Mars has to adjust or accommodate to Saturn's way here. That's what I'm saying. And that's where I think long-term, contained, focused, cautious, planned, measured, that's going to keep you going. Like when flare-ups happen or irritations come at you, manage them, but keep moving. That's the key. The one planet that I think could be fueling the restless impatience of Mars is the moon, because as this aspect peaks, the moon is in Aries, a sign of impulsiveness and wanting quick results or fast outcomes. And the moon will actually it will aspect Mars and Saturn here. So the moon still has to honor Saturn, but I think it's just, we're going to all be dealing with some feelings of, oh, I wish it could happen sooner, or I'm so frustrated that that delay has happened, or that this is not going to happen as quickly as I would like. The moon in Aries kind of amplifies the Mars side of the equation or of this aspect. So just kind of have that mindfulness for about the 48 hours that the moon is in Aries, while this Mars-Saturn opposition is exact. There's going to be a lot of internal kind of that immediate frustration, that sort of feeling of like, I'm just going to, yell or outburst, or I'm angry and I can't hold it in. So we just have to be aware of managing our own anger as this goes. So much to share about this aspect. It's one I could talk about for about 3 hours, but I don't want to keep you too long. I think we've talked about the main themes here. You've got the dates and the details of this aspect. So yes, it is an aspect of frustration and delays. And in the long run, this stress test, cosmic stress test that Mars is kind of placing on Saturn, or that the Mars-Saturn combination is placing on your chart and perhaps your life experiences, it may reveal, or it can reveal, a weak spot or a part of your psyche or your experience or your life setup that isn't quite as well organized or well managed as we might like. Knowing that is going to allow you to make improvements for the future, so that even if things are difficult this week, if you can have that framework or that perspective of how can I use this week's events or experiences to make an improvement that will serve me better for the long term, ultimately, I think that's going to be a great thing. But I do always love to hear how this is showing up in your life and in your chart. Let me know via the comments below. All right, team, take care of yourselves. We'll talk again soon.